We begin with a wave of new hostilities between the U.S. and Iran as the administration struggles to move on from the war. At any moment, the House is set to vote on a war powers resolution that would direct the president to remove U.S. forces from the conflict. Now, remember, that same vote was abruptly pulled last month before the House left for recess, in part because of attendance issues on the Republican side and concerns about further defections. But today's vote comes after the Pentagon confirmed yesterday it fired a Hellfire missile at an oil tanker in the Arabian Gulf that it says was in violation of the U.S. naval blockade. And then hours later, Iran firing a wave of missiles and drone attacks at neighboring Gulf countries, including an attack on Kuwait's international airport that killed one person. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was back on Capitol Hill today defending comments he made yesterday that the war with Iran is over despite these latest escalations.
So is the war still on or is the war off?
Well, epic fury has concluded. On occasion, in order to protect our own forces, we don't just strike the drones, we strike the people who launched those drones. These are completely defensive in nature, and but they are happening in response to an Iranian action.
If the war is over, I have a simple question. Who won?
First of all, epic fury is over, which is what you would consider the war.
The American people are not stupid, Mr. Secretary. We all know that this war is not over. Just last night, the U.S. and Iran exchanged fire again, this time over Karg Island. We still have not reached a deal, despite the president's promise that a deal is right around the corner.
Today, in an interview with the New York Post, President Trump offered little clarity on his negotiating strategy or how long the naval blockade with Iran will remain in place.
We're having a very great success in Iran militarily.
So you think the blockade will still be in place by Labor Day?
I don't know. I mean, I think it could be, but I think it's unlikely. I think that we'll have it. I think this will resolve itself fairly quickly.
And are your tactics where you say something and then change it and then do a peace deal and then break the ceasefire or whatever, is that all about trying to keep the Iranians off balance? Are you sort of messaging to them?
No.
Because people at home sometimes I hear that they feel anxious and confused.
That's good. It's good if they're confused and the Iranians are confused.
Right.
But no, it's just the way I am.
In that same interview, President Trump also addressing the tense phone call he had with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu earlier this week, during which he told the Israeli leader to scale back attacks on Beirut over concerns Israel could be derailing peace negotiations with Iran.
Axios reported that you had a phone call with Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, in which you were angry with him. You said, "Are you effing crazy? What are you effing doing? I helped you stay out of jail." Is that true? Did you speak to him in those terms?
I did. I wouldn't say angry. I was a little bit perturbed at his constantly fighting with Lebanon.
Prime Minister Netanyahu also responded, trying to downplay the disagreement between the two leaders.
President confirmed that he said, "You're effing crazy." How did you react to that? What really happened in that call?
Well, I'm not going to get into details of our conversations. We've had thousands, well, a lot of them. Sometimes we have, as in the best of families, you have these tactical disagreements. We always find a way to work them out, and we do so as great friends. We can disagree in the morning, and by the afternoon we have common action.
And joining me now is NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. NBC's Sahil Kapur is on Capitol Hill, and NBC News national security correspondent Courtney Kube. All of you are here to talk about this. And Monica, let me begin with you, because the president also suggested he would be willing to meet, presumably in person, with the Ayatollah. That's unheard of. And obviously, our viewers remember that the Ayatollah was struck by U.S. action during this conflict. So that would be certainly a tense topic. Is this a sense of the president, again, shifting strategy, throwing additional things into the conversation to keep things off balance? Or is there maybe no greater explanation of it?
Yeah, it's something we have seen time and time again from the president, Kelly, where the president kind of muses about an idea, even though it may not really be based in the reality of it. And also it raises all sorts of questions about how that would work or whether anyone from the Iranian leadership side of things would agree to any such meeting, where that would take place, any of those kinds of concerns. In addition to, we don't really have the entire picture of how he is doing, the supreme leader, given some of his injuries. And the president sort of spoke to that, saying that he was, quote, missing a lot of different parts, if you believe the story. So kind of making a nod to the potential challenges on that as well. And we should note, Kelly, that the president hadn't held an open event with the press pool of reporters in the last week or so. He's certainly been doing those interviews that you played, and he's been to the golf course. But just a few moments ago, he did summon reporters to talk about his reflecting pool renovation and a couple of other things. So he is now potentially going to take some questions on all of this, since we haven't been able to see reporters press him on the latest and the status with the Iranian negotiations, if they're still ongoing, what the latest is there. So we'll see if we get anything from that.
That could definitely be interesting, and I know you'll let us know, wave us down if that's happening. When we look also at the issue of Hezbollah and the Prime Minister of Israel saying that proxy groups have to be disarmed, we get a sense that the President and the Prime Minister are on the same page on that point.
Sure. And we have seen, and I thought that the prime minister put it in a way that perhaps the president would agree with, that there can be these tactical disagreements. Certainly, we know that over the course of the last few years, even though these two men are pretty close personally, certainly they have developed that close personal relationship. There's plenty that they disagree about, and they have engaged and gone back and forth in these fiery or tense phone calls pretty regularly. And it's not that it's something that kind of breaks the relationship apart or sets it back. It sort of just adds to the dynamic. And so the president did also confirm that there were some harsh words, but again, kind of implying that that is how they have been discussing all of this. But the president, Kelly, as you know well, has stressed to Netanyahu that he wants him to do things. He wants him to change his approach, his strategy, only to be met with no such thing.
Perturbed is how he described it. So I bet that's interesting when you come across Donald Trump's sense of being perturbed. Sahil, let me switch to you. There is an important vote that is playing out today, the War Powers Resolution. Certainly Democrats and others have been pushing that. What are you watching, and does this ultimately really amount to symbolism?
Well, Kelly, that vote is expected to start in the House any minute now, just waiting for the buzzer to go off here just a few feet away from me. The main thing I'm watching is the vote of the centrist Democratic Congressman Jared Golden of Maine. The reason being he was the only Democrat to vote in the last one of these to block it, and that one failed by a vote of 212 to 212. He has indicated that he will support it this time around. So unless there are attendance issues, it should pass, although with the margins so slim here in the House, you never truly know until the vote is finished. So if it does pass, it would be the first one of these Iran war resolutions that has passed either chamber. I wouldn't exactly call it symbolic, Kelly, because in the Senate, it's on a knife edge right now. It just needs one more Republican to be able to pass the Senate, and there's a real chance then it could get to the president's desk. He could veto it, but that's a very politically uncomfortable place for him to be, because it gives him, and by extension his party, full ownership of this unpopular war right now.
And certainly Congress is trying to assert the authority it believes it has to try to limit the president's actions in this way, which is why this is so compelling. Courtney, if I can turn to you now. We saw these new Iranian strikes. We saw how the Kuwait airport was affected. It caused death and destruction. Mm-hmm. How do you see this kind of escalation, if you would call it that, or action from Iran? Is that escalating, or is it more of what we've seen in recent weeks?
So we've had this tit for tat that's been going back and forth between the U.S. military and primarily the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, as opposed to the more conventional Iranian military. What really stands out, though, in the last 24 hours, number one, exactly what you just mentioned, Iran had a successful strike on the civilian airport in Kuwait, causing widespread damage and, as you mentioned, at least one death and injuries. It's not just that, though. As these back and forths have escalated to both the U.S. military and the IRGC taking these strikes on one another, this is the first time that we've seen Iran or IRGC respond in two separate locations at once. And that was in the last 24 hours, both firing missiles, drones, projectiles, whatever they were in the various locations at Bahrain and at Kuwait. Now, the U.S. military has also taken a number of actions, several waves of attacks in the same 24 to 48 hours, Kelly.
Another point that was discussed with the president today is his suggestion that the naval blockade the U.S. is imposing against Iranian ports could be in place all summer. Labor Day was thrown about. What would that mean for the kinds of resources and the footprint of U.S. military needed in that region?
I mean, they can maintain it, but it always has an impact. So think about something like the carrier strike groups. You know, they have normal rotations around the world that they're supposed to make, and those are set, in most cases, several years in advance. If you have two carrier strike groups that are sitting there enforcing the blockade and basically being ready in case President Trump decides that he wants to restart major combat operations against Iran, that ultimately starts to have an impact down the fleet, so having an impact on other carrier rotations. They only have so many of them. And then you can extrapolate that or move that out to other assets like aircraft, like the sorts of systems and the people who have all been moved forward. Kelly, ever since the major combat operations ended, now almost 2 months ago, the U.S. military has maintained a large footprint in the region for the very reason I just mentioned. Donald Trump could decide to restart major combat operations anytime he wants to.
And that's what makes it so we wait every word he says to try and get an indication of that.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.